You wanted to explore this idea of grit, right? Like success comes from pushing through any obstacle with just sheer willpower. But we've got some research here that's going to make you rethink that whole just try harder thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating how this concept of grit often ignores the role of our brains,
Right.
especially the prefrontal cortex, or PFC as it's called. We'll be diving into excerpts from a book that tackles this very topic,
Oh, cool.
showing how the PFC is way more complex than we usually give credit for.
Yeah. So we've got this belief, right, that we don't choose the cards we're dealt in life,
Right.
our genes, childhood, and so on. But team, we do choose how we play them.
Mm.
That's where grit's supposed to kick in, but the book throws a curveball.
Yeah.
It argues that even our grit stems from the PFC. What does this mean for free will?
It all boils down to this illusion of separation between us and our brains.
Okay.
We feel so strongly that, like, I'm the one making the choice.
Right.
But research is showing that this feeling of I making the decision,
Yeah.
that's also a product of brain activity, specifically in the PFC.
Okay, so before we go any further, let's make sure we're all on the same page. What exactly is the PFC? And why should we care about it when we're talking about grit?
So think of the PFC as your brain's executive control center.
Okay.
It's the part that helps you make decisions, plan, resist those tempting donuts.
Oh, yeah?
Basically do the harder thing when you need to. It's the most recently evolved part of our brains,
Interesting.
meaning we humans have a lot more of it compared to other animals.
So bigger PFC equals more willpower, more grit. Is that the takeaway here?
Not quite. It's not just about size.
Okay.
It's about how the PFC works and crucially how it develops.
Gotcha.
And this is where it gets really interesting
Yeah.
because this brain region we associate with grit
Right.
is influenced by a whole host of factors that are often outside of our control.
Okay.
To fully grasp this, let's look at some specific examples of how the PFC operates.
Okay.
One area where it plays a crucial role is in social situations.
Give me an example of that. How does the PFC help us navigate the social world?
Let's say you encounter someone of a different race.
Mm-hmm.
There might be a split-second activation of the amygdala, your brain's fear center,
Right.
based on unconscious biases.
Mm.
But for most people, the PFC steps in, inhibits that amygdala response,
Okay.
and basically says, hold on, don't jump to conclusions.
Yeah.
It helps you make a more considered and socially appropriate choice.
So the PFC acts like a filter for our knee-jerk reactions, helping us make better choices.
Exactly.
But how does this connect to grit?
Well, that act of inhibiting a bias, of choosing the harder but more socially appropriate response, that's the PFC demonstrating a form of grit.
Okay.
But here's the crucial point. The development of your PFC, its ability to function effectively,
Right.
is influenced by a complex interplay of factors that you don't always consciously control.
Okay, now that's where things start to get really interesting. You're saying the very thing we think gives us grit is shaped by forces beyond our control. That seems like a direct challenge to the idea of free will, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Let's look at some of these influential factors, starting with the more immediate ones.
Right.
Even something as simple as stress, hunger, or fatigue can significantly impact your PFC's ability to do its job.
Interesting.
Remember that study on judges and parole decisions?
Yeah, the one where judges were more likely to grant parole after they'd eaten?
Exactly. As the day wore on and the judges got hungrier,
Yeah.
their PFCs got tired, making it harder to make the effortful decision to grant parole.
Right.
They defaulted to the easier option of denying parole,
Wow.
highlighting how something as basic as hunger can influence even high-stakes decision-making.
Wow. That study makes you wonder how many other seemingly rational decisions are actually influenced by factors we're not even aware of.
Right.
It raises some ethical questions, doesn't it? If simple hunger can sway a judge's decision, what does that mean for fairness in the legal system?
It certainly highlights the complexity of free will and how much we might underestimate the influence of our biology.
For sure.
But let's go deeper.
Okay.
It's not just these immediate states. Hormones also play a huge role in shaping how the PFC functions.
Okay, break that down for me. What kind of hormonal influence are we talking about?
We're talking about hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and oxytocin.
Mm-hmm.
These fluctuate throughout the day
Okay.
and directly impact your PFC's ability to control impulses,
Okay.
regulate emotions, and make those gritty choices we've been talking about.
So my ability to resist that extra slice of cake might be influenced by my estrogen levels. It's incredible how our biology plays such a subtle role in even our everyday decisions.
Yeah, it really highlights the intricate connection between our bodies and minds.
Definitely.
But the influences on our PFC go far beyond those daily hormonal shifts.
Okay.
We also have to consider the long-term shaping that happens over our lifetime.
What do you mean by long-term shaping?
This is where things get even more complex. Childhood experiences, socioeconomic status, trauma, even the environment you were exposed to in the womb.
Wow.
All of these leave lasting marks on the structure and function of your PFC.
So you're saying that my childhood experiences, something that happened years ago, could be influencing my ability to exert willpower today?
That's exactly what the research suggests. Think about it.
Okay.
If you grew up in a chaotic, unpredictable environment, your PFC might be wired to be more reactive to stress.
Right.
Making it harder for you to stay calm and focused in challenging situations.
That makes sense. If your brain is constantly on high alert, it would be harder to access that grit we've been talking about.
Yeah.
It's like your mental resources are already depleted from dealing with a constant state of stress.
That's a great way to put it.
Thanks.
And it's not just about childhood experiences.
Okay.
Socioeconomic factors like poverty or lack of access to resources can also have a profound impact on PFC development.
This is really making me rethink my whole understanding of grit. It's not just about individual effort. It's about this complex interplay of our biology and our environment.
And it doesn't stop there.
Oh.
Genes also play a role, but it's not as simple as good genes versus bad genes. It's more about how your genes interact with your environment.
Okay.
Some gene variants might make your PFC more or less susceptible to outside influences.
This is a lot to take in. So it's not nature versus nurture. It's nature through nurture.
Precisely. This incredibly intricate dance between your genes and your experiences shapes the very brain region we associate with willpower and grit.
Wow.
And it happens throughout your entire life.
This is mind-blowing. It completely challenges the idea that we're solely responsible for our level of grit.
And there's one more layer to this complex picture that we need to explore.
Okay.
Our culture, the values and beliefs we're raised with, also shapes our PFC in profound ways.
Culture. How does that fit into the equation?
Well, research has shown that people from collectivist cultures, where the emphasis is on group harmony and interdependence, actually show different patterns of PFC activity compared to those from individualistic cultures.
Interesting.
Which prioritize personal achievement and independence.
That's fascinating. Are you saying that the values we're exposed to can literally shape how our brains function?
It's a powerful example of how our biology and environment are constantly interacting.
For sure.
Think about it. The way you're raised. The values your culture emphasizes. All of that reinforces certain neural pathways in your brain. It even influences the frequency of certain gene variants over generations.
So it's like this incredible feedback loop between biology and culture, shaping the very brain region we associate with willpower.
Exactly. And it challenges us to think beyond simplistic explanations of grit and free will. It's not just about individual effort. It's about recognizing the powerful influences that shape our brains and our choices.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Makes you
It does.
So we've established that culture can actually shape the way our brains function, even influencing the PFC, which we thought was the seat of willpower.
Right.
It's amazing how interconnected everything is.
It really highlights the complexity of the human experience, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We like to think of ourselves as individuals, but we're constantly being shaped by forces beyond our conscious control.
Makes you wonder how much agency we really have.
Yeah.
If our PFC is molded by our genes, environment, and even our culture, where does free will fit in?
That's a question that philosophers have been grappling with for centuries.
Right.
And neuroscience is adding a whole new dimension to the debate.
For sure.
Let's circle back to this concept of grit and how it relates to free will.
Okay.
We've seen that the PFC plays a crucial role in making those tough choices. Those moments where we have to dig deep and push through.
Right.
But if the PFC itself is a product of all these uncontrollable factors,
Right.
can we really say that we are freely choosing to exert willpower?
That's the paradox, isn't it? It feels like we're the ones making the decision to push through.
Yeah.
But if our brains are already wired in a certain way, how much control do we really have?
The book dives into a study that really gets to the heart of this dilemma.
Oh, interesting.
Researchers had people choose between tasks, some that rewarded self-discipline and some that didn't.
Okay.
What they found was fascinating. The VMPFC, which is the part of the PFC involved in processing emotions and rewards, lit up when people chose the tasks that emphasized self-discipline.
So it's like our brains are wired to seek out the feeling of reward associated with exerting willpower.
It's almost as if our brains are tricking us into feeling like we have free will.
Okay.
We experience this sense of agency, this feeling of I making the choice.
Yeah.
Even though the very mechanisms underlying that feeling are largely determined by factors outside of our conscious control.
This is getting a bit Inception-like, isn't it? It makes you question everything you thought you knew about decision-making.
It certainly challenges our assumptions.
Right.
But before we spiral down the rabbit hole of existentialism,
Right.
let's bring this back to the practical implications of what we're learning.
Okay.
If our brains are wired to seek out the reward of self-discipline,
Yeah.
it means we're not simply passive bystanders in the development of our grit.
So it's not all doom and gloom. There's still a role for effort and intentionality.
Absolutely. The book argues that this understanding of the PFC and its development should empower us to make more informed choices.
Okay.
If we know that stress, for example, can deplete our PFC's resources,
Right.
we can prioritize strategies for stress management.
That makes sense. If we're constantly running on fumes, it's going to be much harder to tap into those reserves of willpower.
Yeah.
It's like expecting a car to run a marathon on an empty tank.
Exactly. This knowledge also helps us cultivate compassion, both for ourselves and for others.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of blaming people for lacking grit, we can start to recognize the complex factors that might be influencing their choices.
This whole conversation has been a real eye-opener. It's making me rethink how I judge myself and others.
Right.
If grit isn't just this innate quality, this magical force of will, but a product of complex biological and environmental factors, it changes everything.
It really underscores the importance of understanding the brain and how it works.
Definitely.
We can't simply rely on willpower or motivation to solve complex problems.
Okay.
We need to address the underlying factors that shape our brains and our behavior.
This brings to mind the example the book uses of addiction.
Right.
Addiction is often seen as a moral failing, a lack of willpower.
Yeah.
But if we understand how addiction hijacks the brain's reward system, making it incredibly difficult to resist those cravings, it paints a completely different picture.
The book talks about how addiction can literally change the wiring of the PFC. Wow. Making it harder for individuals to exert the control we expect of them.
Right.
It's a powerful illustration of how biology and choice interact in complex ways.
So it's not about excusing addictive behavior, but understanding the underlying neurobiology that makes it so challenging to overcome.
Precisely. And this understanding can inform more effective treatment approaches that address the root causes of addiction, not just the symptoms.
This whole discussion about the PFC and grit raises so many questions about responsibility. If our choices are so heavily influenced by factors beyond our conscious control, where do we draw the line?
Right.
How much agency do we really have?
That's a question that society is going to have to grapple with as we learn more about the brain.
For sure.
The book doesn't provide easy answers.
Right.
But it pushes us to move beyond simplistic notions of blame and personal responsibility.
This is definitely a conversation starter. It's going to stay with me long after this deep dive is over.
I think that's the mark of a truly impactful topic.
Yeah.
It challenges our assumptions and pushes us to consider new ways of thinking.
This whole discussion about the PFC and grit has really challenged my assumptions about willpower and personal responsibility. It's like we've been operating under this illusion that we're in complete control of our choices, but the reality is much more complex.
It's a paradigm shift, isn't it? We're moving away from this simplistic view of the brain as a blank slate and recognizing the powerful influences of our biology, our environment, and even our cultural heritage.
We talked about how addiction can hijack the PFC, making it harder for individuals to resist cravings. But the book goes even further back, exploring how early childhood experiences can leave a lasting imprint on the brain's development.
The book highlights a study where researchers looked at the impact of early childhood trauma on the development of the PFC. And what they found was that children who experienced significant trauma like abuse or neglect showed altered patterns of PFC activity later in life.
So these early experiences can actually change the physical structure and function of the brain.
That's incredible and a little bit scary to think about. It underscores the critical importance of early childhood interventions and the need to create supportive environments for children, especially those who've experienced trauma. If we can provide the right kind of support, we can help mitigate the negative impacts of these early experiences on brain development.
That's a hopeful message amidst all this complexity. It means we're not just prisoners of our past. We can create conditions that foster resilience and help individuals overcome adversity.
It speaks to the incredible plasticity of the brain, its ability to adapt and change throughout our lives. This doesn't mean that overcoming the effects of early trauma is easy. but it does mean that change is possible.
This whole conversation has really made me think about how we judge people, particularly those who struggle with things like addiction or impulsivity. If their brains have been shaped by forces beyond their control, can we really hold them fully accountable for their choices?
The book challenges us to rethink our notions of responsibility, particularly within our legal system. If we understand that an individual's capacity for self-control is influenced by factors like childhood trauma or addiction, it raises questions about the fairness of our current approach to punishment.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers, but this new understanding of the brain and its development forces us to have these difficult conversations and consider alternative approaches to justice.
It's not about excusing harmful behavior, but rather seeking a more nuanced and compassionate understanding of the factors that contribute to it. This knowledge empowers us to create more effective interventions and support systems that address the root causes of these issues.
This deep dive has been a real journey of discovery. It's challenged my assumptions and opened up new ways of thinking about willpower, grit, and the very nature of free will. It's a lot to process, but it's definitely a conversation worth having.
I think that's the essence of a good deep dive, isn't it?
Yeah.
It sparks curiosity, encourages us to question our beliefs, and leaves us with more questions than answers.
It's a reminder that the quest for knowledge is an ongoing process, and there's always more to learn and explore.
We've just scratched the surface of this fascinating topic. We encourage you to continue exploring the book we discussed today and delve deeper into the research on the PFC and its impact on our choices.
That's it for this deep dive on grit, free will, and the incredible complexity of the human brain. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking.
We'll see you next time for another deep dive into the mysteries of